Welcome to Evolving on Purpose with Matt Swartz. This podcast is where real leaders share the inner work behind their breakthroughs and where you'll find the tools and stories to work through whatever is holding you back from who you're meant to be so you can make the impact you're here to make and help change the world.
Hey everybody, welcome to the second episode with Ryan Abriel. Ryan, glad to have you back.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. Ryan Abriel is a brand and content marketing leader in the global sportswear industry. High school basketball coach, photographer, husband, father of two, and author of Still Here, 365 Reasons to Keep Going. Speaking of which, between the last episode and now, Ryan sent me over his book. Thanks for sending it, Ryan. We really appreciate it, dude. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate the plug, man. That's great.
No, we're really excited. I love it. You know, it's structured one day at a time. It's like a little devotional, right? Mm-hmm. We can go little piece at a time, one at a time. So, you know, it's not too much. And I love that. I think that's really this day and age and, you know, TikTok world, right? We need a little nugget. So I think it's designed really well.
Thank you. I appreciate this. Some of these topics are super overwhelming or dense, a lot to consume. And so I think one a day, one affirmation a day, gives you a lot to chew on, a lot to meditate about. So, this journey is not going to be solved in one day. You know what I mean? So, it's meant to kind of pace yourself and make it a marathon.
For sure. While we're on the subject, before I finish your bio, where can people find it if they want to grab the book right now?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon in various countries, including the U.S., of course, and as well as Barnes & Nobles. And soon I'm working to get this on shelves in Barnes & Noble's brick and mortar. I'm not sure exactly which locations, but as of right now, Amazon and BarnesandNobles.com.
Awesome, dude. That's super awesome. Cool.
Thank you.
So for the past 13 years, Ryan has navigated anxiety, depression, and panic attacks while continuing to lead, create, coach, and show up for the people around him. Through his writing, storytelling, and mentorship, he hopes to help normalize conversations around mental health, resilience, and the invisible battles people carry every day. His work is grounded in the belief that authenticity, vulnerability, and human connection can help people feel seen, understood, and reminded that they are not alone in what they're facing. Ryan, super glad to have you back, dude.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate, as always, you sharing your platform with me and many other people in this world. So these are conversations that, you know, should and can be normalized. And I believe this topic of what I've been going through is relatable to many people, at least one other person, you know what I mean? And that's the whole point of my book, is at least one person can relate to it and find understanding that, like, hey, this is what I go through, you know, and kind of put a name and label to some of these feelings and emotions and experiences. So I'm hoping that if I can just impact that one person, then I've already done my job as an author, or just as a human, honestly.
Totally. Well, the stats tell us, Ryan, that 40% of American adults are, you know, experiencing or have experienced or will experience anxiety or depression. And those are just the ones that are diagnosed. So, you know, we feel like it's like 60, 70, 80, right? Because not everybody gets diagnosed, right?
Yeah. 100%. Just the amount of people I've met in my life that, you know, I never would have thought that they, you know, go through this maybe the same way they viewed me at one point. You know, it's those conversations and those relationships have come to the surface since bringing this book, you know, making it public, right? And so just being able to be like, wow, like that person goes through this. I never would have guessed. But again, like, and I think we talked about this last time, you know, I've worn a mask for so many years of wanting people to think I'm someone that deep down, I don't feel like I'm that person, but I want to show up as a tough and dependable provider and parent and husband and professional and coach. And so I'm trying to, you know, kind of put a smile on my face, but underneath that smile, there's nothing related to a smile. So it's one of those things where other people go through it, and it's a relief to see other people that like carry the same load. And it's a lot lighter when you have other people to carry it with.
For sure. So, and I got two things to say to that, but first I got to do the disclaimer. Everybody out there in podcast land, what we're about to do is we're about to go into a coaching episode. The goal here is to work through some stuff with Ryan, talk through some of the challenges he's been experiencing. This is not therapy. We are not providing a medical service. This is not meant to diagnose, treat, or address any medical or mental health condition. I am operating as a coach in this space, so we're just exploring some of these things that are going on. I may, help Ryan find some ideas and recommendations. I will certainly present information, but we are not here to address anybody's medical issue. Cool beans? Cool beans. Great.
Got it.
I have to say it every time.
Love it.
My lawyer has told me. So that'll be fun for the next however many years of my life. What Ryan and I talked a little bit about what we're kind of getting into, and the goal here is just kind of talk a little through some of Ryan's experiences and then kind of bring in some of the information that I can provide that might be helpful to him. Going off of what you just said, Ryan, two things I want to say right off the bat. Number one, anxiety and depression, panic, any of these things are not, it's very easy to go, these are disorders. But the reality is that this is the way the human nervous system is designed. These are not abnormal states. They've been pathologized by our medical institution in the same way that like a cold is not abnormal. Like that's, right? Like you're going to get a cold, like that's going to happen. Right. And the same thing is true of depression and anxiety. These are, and we can explain it as we go along a little, but these are adaptive mechanisms that exist inside the human nervous system to cope with pain. And so like, that's number one, we're breaking the stigma. Level one of stigma is like, yeah, everybody has this, but level two is, this is actually how the brain, the body were designed to work. Is that something that you've come across so far in your journey?
Yeah, when I've met with other professionals in the space, like yourself, that's come up where it's the point that it's been brought up with is that sometimes it's just out of your control, right? It's built in to your, I guess, operating system, right? Some people do a better job than others at, ignoring those feelings and emotions or finding ways to overcome them. Or some people's operating system is well oiled where they can still continue in life in spite of what they're going through. And other people like me, I like to think, have some breakdowns in my OS where I'm trying to find ways to, cover all the holes before the water comes out. So I've heard that before, and it's hard to accept that. Even today, as we talk, it's like, I wish I could control this. I wish there was a button I could push to kind of turn it off or to kind of hit delay or postpone, but it doesn't work that way. So, I accept it. I don't love it, but I accept it. And so for me, it's like coming to understand that that's just a part of human nature. That has helped definitely in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think there's a tweak there, Ryan, and I promise I'll ask you questions, but like,
oh, you're good.
Part of what I'm, communicating is like, let's use the metaphor, right? There are, my operating system works X, Y, Z way, right? And this, when we treat it as a problem and start fighting against it, it gets worse and it gets worse and gets worse. So I've seen a lot of people like in your situation where, the whole is not just, these symptoms have gotten worse. The issue is, and along the way I've been fighting it, right? And that's, exacerbated the issue. And we fight it in different ways. One of the, try to hide it, suppress it, all of those things. Once we start to break down what this thing is and why it works the way it works, we can, on one hand, learn skills for managing it, which I think is not going to be so much your problem here. I think you've done that digging and you've, figured some of those things out. But the side that myself and I think certain other people, because there's different brands of coaches and therapists and all of that, that I kind of focus on is once we understand what this thing is and why it's working the way it's working, there are predictable ways of addressing it that aren't just, you were talking before, right? Oh, here, do this worksheet, do your breathing exercise. And not that a breathing exercise is bad, but time and time again, right? I get, I have people walk in the door. I'm never very, very often, very not often, am I the first coach or the first therapist that somebody sees. And they come in the door with, okay, well, I've got these coping skills and this, but it really hasn't moved the needle as far as I want it to move. And so that's the discussion I really want to have with you and people is like, if you've hit that point, there's stuff, and we'll, kind of get into that.
Yep, that makes sense. I've hit that point many times, and I'm at that point right now, so I think this conversation and us meeting each other I don't believe it's a coincidence. I think it's meant to be a part of my journey and help me and consider different things and different opinions and different methods. I believe mental health and, is a lifelong journey. I've come to accept that it's just a part of my identity, for as long as I may live. So, I used to be embarrassed by that and ashamed of that, but now I think it's almost like a responsibility that I have to kind of use my experiences and my story and my beliefs about mental health and share that with people who are looking for answers, but just don't quite know where to find them right now.
Totally. So the place I'm going to start is the same place I'd start with anybody. So talk to me about the experiences you've had so far in therapy, coaching, and you don't tell me everything, but like what's worked and what hasn't. So, tell me about, who don't give me names, right? But what you've tried and what's worked and what hasn't.
Yeah, I've probably seen, as you were talking, I started to do a bit of an inventory of the number of professionals I've, visited and met for professional help. And, I think I met seven therapists throughout my journey of the last 13 years. That does not include, psychiatrists who prescribe medications. I've probably met with 3 of those. One of them still currently, that kind of help me with the medications I take today. So I've met with, I like to think, a good amount of people, and I've kind of, experienced all sorts of strategies and methods and communication styles when it comes to, how these experts tried to help me and support me. Right. And you mentioned, we joked about kind of, the breathing exercises. That's a real thing. And that's something that I know, that, and I know that, and that those are things that I've tried, and still try and even use with my own kids, when they're having a moment. So breathing exercises, I've been, recommended books to read and shows to watch. And, I've been, told of different, thoughts and meditations I could go through in moments where I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed by a moment or by a particular circumstance, where to kind of put my mind, where to send my mind, kind of that happy place. And I've tried these things, and I'm not saying they don't work, but I know enough about myself where I truly believe my mind is very complex, compared to, I hate even comparing, but compared to the average person. I think my puzzle and my maze is a little bit harder to solve. And that may be because of my own stubbornness, of not accepting certain realities of my life and situations. That may be, again, me not doing, completely, being fully invested into the homework, into the commitments that I'm asked to make during these therapy sessions. And, I'm a big sports fanatic, Matt. So a lot of these conversations and most of these therapists have been male, and it always comes back to sports. I feel like we start talking about me and my week and some, what have I gone through? By the end of the session, Matt, we're talking about the Super Bowl, the game last night, so I found myself kind of deviating from what I was there for. And I almost developed a friendship along the way, which was nice, but no disrespect to those professionals, I didn't need a friend. I think I needed somebody to push me from the back, or even pull me from the front, whatever was going to get me moving. But I just felt like by the end of those sessions, I felt like it became very informal and very just casual. And I wasn't, I loved it in that moment, but I was paying these people, right? And I didn't see the value in the end. And again, no one was holding me accountable, including myself. I wasn't holding myself accountable. So I hit pause. It's probably been about 3 years since I've seen somebody, a therapist, that helped me with some practices outside of medication. And that's just been by choice, because I felt like I wasn't getting the answers I was looking for.
For sure. Yeah. And again, I think a super normal experience, unfortunately, right? So it sounds like, you probably have tried the, what I would call the standard stuff. Let me ask this real quick. How long has your longest relationship with a therapist or coach been?
I think a year, back in 2013, right when I first had my, that milestone, that panic attack I wrote about on day one of my book. I about a month after that is when I started to see somebody professionally, and that carried over to, the following year in spring. But again, by the end of that experience, we were talking about, again, professional sports, college sports, favorite teams, and, what was in the headlines. I'm not lying to you. By the end of that, Matt, about 90% of those sessions were about things outside of me. And maybe they thought that was helpful to me. And in the moment, it to me was like almost like a relief, because I didn't have to talk about my challenges and these hurdles. So a year, and then since then, maybe 2 to 3 months stints, and that's kind of been it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate the honesty. And I think, again, like I said before we started, like, so normal for especially like high achievers, leaders, to like, listen, my bullshit detector is high, right? And
totally.
I could talk about sports with anybody. And actually, interesting, I am not a sports guy, so not me. I won't talk. But like, you can talk to, well, exactly, right? My guess is you've been to like standard, like cognitive behavioral therapists, talk therapists, that kind of thing. Do you? And if I'm too in the weeds on modalities, you can
not at all
pull me out. But have you ever done somatic therapy?
No, never heard of it, to be honest with you, Matt.
Yeah. So this is an interesting and cool thing. So somatic therapy is an umbrella term, and basically what it says is, I'm going to relate this to sports from my non-sports vantage point, right? Imagine trying to practice basketball. You and me were just sitting on the bench talking about what angles we should move our hands and how far away from the hoop we should be and what we would do if this guy moved to that place. Yeah. How far are we going to get?
Gosh, not too far, I would imagine. Yeah.
Not too, right? So somatics, takes the idea that this is fundamentally a biological experience, right? And even apart from behavioral therapy, which says, hey, you can change these behaviors or change these habits. Okay. Cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy that says we can change the way we're thinking, what we believe, right? Somatics focuses instead on the physical experience and the emotional experience. Yeah. And when you're having panic attacks, right? Like, good luck thinking your way out of that, right?
Totally.
So there are specific kinds of somatic therapy in the same way that there's specific kinds of like talk therapy. Have you ever heard of something called EMDR?
No, not familiar with that.
So this is all so perfect. So you're my perfect person, because so many leaders and high achievers, like, I haven't heard of this stuff. Why would I hear of this stuff? Right. Which would be the same, I enter your world and you're going to tell me all of these things about sports that I don't freaking know. Right.
Right.
How does sports management work? I don't know any of that stuff. Right. The within that somatic umbrella, there's this type of therapy that, long story short, was ultimately what finally helped me, which is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's, fancy term for basically we wiggle our eyes back and forth. There's more to it than that. But we're getting into the biological wiring of what's actually going on when these things are happening, when the panic attacks are happening, when the anxiety is happening, when we're having these depressive reactions, right? And we start actually rewiring the emotion and the physicality around these things instead of just sitting and talking about them.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. So not an experience you've had so far.
No. I kind of wish I could say I have, but I haven't. It's like I'm missing out on some fun.
Well, you are. There's some fun. It's hard because, like you said, you don't get to just sit there and talk about things that aren't the anxiety. You have to feel it. But, you've been feeling it anyway. So, what's the, you can feel it again. And, and again, actively rewiring these things. And I can, again, like I started doing this work, you might say like a little more than halfway through my career. I spent like the first half of my career as sort of a standard talk therapist, but got to the point where, I was maybe 60, 70% better. My clients were maybe 60, 70% better. I had my first kid. That was the trigger for me. And then the issues kept building. And my wife was like, you need to go back to therapy. Like, you got to fix this. And there was a guy in the office next to me that did this EMDR. And I said, all right, Randy, you've been talking to me about it for 3 years. Let's go. And it was an absolute game changer. So I'm, not something we do here necessarily. It's something we can talk about, but
totally.
Most people have not heard of this whole avenue. And then I go, yeah, no wonder you haven't, right? Like, because you've been trying to talk your way out of anxiety for all of these years, right?
Yeah, and you just mentioned something that I think is critical to my own personal experience about being a parent, having your first kid. I remember, that was probably another milestone on my journey, right? Becoming a parent, becoming responsible for somebody else's life outside of my own, and my life changing forever and never going back to being the same, and having this pressure and this expectation to, again, be a great husband and be a great father. And I felt like my anxiety, quadrupled, the day he was born. And that's hard to, admit, but it's also true though, because my worries about myself now became my worries about him too, right? Like, I was fearful of him. Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be happy? Is he going to be, feel, entertained? Is he going to feel respected by, his peers one day? Is he going to be safe going to school, which is crazy to even say these days? Like those things I had for myself now were projected onto him. He's 9 now. My kid's 9. And so I've been going through this with him and it's funny, the years it's gotten easier as the years he's gotten older, because I know he can in some ways fend for himself and take care of himself. So, now I have a 5-year-old as well who, when he was born, I didn't have any anxiety and I don't know why. And I'm actually kind of like frustrated, like, well, how come I had it with my first kid and not my second? Maybe because I've done this dance before, so I kind of knew what to expect, but it's crazy how I can relate to you, how being a parent just, it changes everything about you, and it almost makes you go back. All the progress you made up to that point, you're now set back and have to start over. And it's almost like, well, that's not fair. Like, if I would have known that, it makes you wonder, like, should I have even had a kid to begin with? But at the end of the day, it's like, there's never a right time or perfect time for anything, especially having kids. And, I look back at that now and I'm like, gosh, I wish I was more happy and more excited and more I'm glad my kid was too young to know that, like, I was a shell of myself the first probably year of his life. And now he probably sees as funny, loving, happy, excited dad who goes on adventures with him. But that wasn't who I was when he was born. And I didn't think I would ever get past, being this scared little puppy. I think I'm better now. But again, I don't know if that's just because I have more trust in the world or more trust in him. But I found so much relatability to what you're saying. So, I've tried to communicate that too. I will say, Matt, and I'll stop here. Try to share that with people, people I've met with professionals and no one's been able to kind of help me work through that. They're like, oh, maybe it's postpartum, men get that too, which I believe that, but it's like, okay, you've identified what it could be, but it's like, how do I overcome it? And that's kind of where I stopped getting solutions other than tell me what it is. I need to know, okay, what do I do now? And I never got that, so.
For sure. Yeah. And definitely really similar, Ryan, because the long story short, I'd gotten control of my panic attacks probably 4 years before I had my kid. And then it was like, oh, fuck. Like, come on.
Here we go.
Like, we were good. Like, what happened? Yeah. And, so it's panic attack wreck and other symptoms and all those things, right? Mm-hmm. But my hope is, other parents out there, maybe they're hearing this when they're having that experience. What I would want to say to them is, let this be the trigger to you, like, looking at this differently. And I totally hear that you tried, right? And this is, Ryan, some of these things are newer, right? Like, the reality is I'm very much, the work that I do, like, I'm very much on the leading edge of some of this. There are absolutely thousands of other practitioners on the leading edge too, but it's not mainstream, right? Mm-hmm. Mainstream is, call a therapist, talk about your feelings, talk about your week, any of that, right? Yeah. And like you said, like, most clever people, most leaders have never heard the word somatics or, and there's some TV shows where EMDR is popping up. Billions, I think, is one of, there's like,
I've heard
I don't
of
know
it,
if you've ever seen it. I didn't see it. There's like a scene where they do it, but it's just, we're on the leading edge, right? So all we can do is keep pushing forward. So, Ryan, what I do normally is, and again, I want to kind of show people what the normal experience would look like. Like, the first thing we do is we assess, right? We don't jump in and say, I'm not going to tell you, hey, do this thing, this will magically fix it, right? Because before we implement any of these techniques, we have to know what your specific constellation and flavor is, right? I always tend to walk people through 4 distinct categories of symptoms. There's physical symptoms, what goes on in your body. There's cognitive symptoms, the thought patterns that you're used to. Emotional symptoms, the things that you're feeling. And behavioral symptoms, the things that you do. So if you're open to it, and again, I don't want to turn it into an hour, but I do want to get like a kind of bird's eye view. If I went through each of those categories with you, would you be willing to share what your symptoms look like for you normally?
Totally. I'm an open book. Like literally, you have it on your desk. So I'll talk about anything when it comes to this topic.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Great. So let's start with the physical stuff. Like if you're having a reaction, if you're anxious, when I get different moments are different, but if you look at kind of overall, how does your body react and respond? What's normal for you?
Oh man. I mean, I hate to even say that it's normal, but it's true. Like I know exactly what those are. For me, it's, my heart rate, goes up. I'm actually, I sweat a lot naturally. It's just my body's always burning. I don't know what it is. Hopefully it's calories, but but then I get like super consumed with like this overwhelming like heat, and I start sweating, and then I feel like a sense of like dizziness and sometimes even a shortness of breath, and the years, even last year when I felt these at some points, and randomly I would be like, I got to go to the doctors. And so I go to the ER, I go to Instacare. I'm like, I need EKG. I need this, I need that. Like help remove that. It's nothing that's physically wrong with me. Like help I almost wanted them to say, it's in your head, which I did not want to hear 13 years ago when I first was diagnosed with this. I didn't want to hear it in my head when I was having these panic attacks. But now I want to hear that. I want to hear that you're good, you're healthy. So just last year I did a stress test, cause again, I was reading books with my kid one night, Matt, and I was reading to him, and the next thing you know it, I stopped talking because I could not catch my breath. And I felt my heart beating on my chest. So I'm like, hey, I'll be right back. And I went and got my wife. I'm like, I need you to read the rest of this book to him. And I'm like pacing in her room, and she's like, all right, like I got you. And I'm like pacing, trying to get my breath. And I'm just like, I think I'm going to die right now. But again, like that's what my physical panic attacks look like.
Yeah, totally. And everybody's different, right? Some people they feel it in their stomach, and for some people it's in their chest, and for some people it's in your head. And so,
chest and head
but you've got this, you've got the head chest, you've got the sweats, which is not unique, by the way. Totally, pretty common. Mm-hmm. The heat thing is interesting. Like I'm not going to say like rare, but I would not say like super common, but it's amazing what, basically your danger system is tying into these functions in your brain, in your body, and everybody's pattern is different. And then unfortunately, the longer it goes on, the more those things get wired in. So it starts working backwards as well for some people, where if I start to feel the feeling in my chest, then the anxiety comes because my brain has gone both ways now, right? If I start to get hot or I start to sweat, my brain may start taking me into anxiety, even though nothing's happening, because it's so, it's associated those feelings. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yes.
So those are the physical symptoms. And again, when I do these presentations, I read it like one of those pharmaceutical commercials, because there's so many different physical symptoms. Mm-hmm. So I just want to make that clear that it can look like a lot of things. And yes, go to the doctor and double check and do the diagnostics, but a lot of the time it's anxiety. Yeah. So that's one category. Next, and I kind of order this usually in terms of like what is most visible to people. And often the next most visible thing is the things we think. Are there pretty persistent thought patterns that you've noticed through the years that you end up going back to? I mean, honestly, you already shared one of them is like, oh, is something wrong with me? Like, am I going to die kind of thing? Like that's a thought pattern. Are there other thoughts that you find yourself coming to frequently when you're anxious or starting to feel some of that panic?
Yeah, I think some of the thoughts I get is kind of like almost mapping out my exit, right? Like, how do I escape this situation, not just mentally or emotionally, but like physically? Like, where's the emergency exit, right? How do I just get to a spot where it's just me and myself and my thoughts? So that's a big one. I wrote about this in my book. No one is better at the Irish goodbye than me. Like, I can disappear and you won't even know it, right? I've mastered that. It's a crazy thing to be proud of, but I'm good at that, right? So that's one thing I think about is like, how do I get out of this situation? Another thing that comes to mind, it's more depressive thinking, but it's like, again, never had any thoughts of wanting to take my own life. And I'm very, very aware of those thoughts, but it's like, I do ask myself sometimes, like, man, like how long can I live like this? How long can I live with these physical symptoms when I have panic attacks, or these symptoms of wanting to leave a room and find the nearest exit even before I've even sat down to enjoy the event or the party or whatever I'm at? Like, how long can I continue living this way? Cause it's miserable, right? So a lot of like sadness and like hopelessness is kind of what comes to mind. And, again, no one should enjoy those feelings. I sure don't. But I try to wake myself up pretty quick. I tell myself a lot, you've made it this far. You know what I mean? Like, you've made it 13 years and even more, living this way. You've found a way, you found purpose to keep going. So, in those moments of weakness, I find I don't know what that purpose is, cause again, like, how long do I have to keep suffering in my mind? But those are some of the thoughts. And I also say, I feel bad for people around me. I feel bad for my wife, and I'm like, man, she must be like so embarrassed or so disappointed, or like my kids must be so confused. Like, why is dad, acting this way, or why is he quiet? Why is he disengaged? Like, I start to almost like guess what other people are thinking, and thinking that I'm the main character in their story. And I don't want to be the main character in other people's stories. So those are a lot of the thoughts. My mind's always racing to the point where I take a sleeping pill every night before bed that also, moonlights as an antidepressant, mirtazapine, and it puts me to sleep, because if I don't take that, Matt, my mind is it is endless, an endless NASCAR, Daytona 500 up there if I don't take that pill. So.
Good news is you're smart. Bad news is it starts to work against you, right? Mm-hmm. And that's, again, for so many of my clients, like, intelligence is not the issue. That's not, and it goes wild. So, shared some good patterns, right? Not good, but some clear patterns, right?
Yeah.
How can I get out of here? Yeah. How is this affecting other people? Yeah. How long am I going to be stuck here? I have a very particular question for you based on what you're saying. Early in the experience, year 1, 2, 3, 4, were there more thoughts of how do I fix this? And then did that diminish over the years, or was that not a place that you frequently went to in the beginning?
Oh, I've always been going to that place since the day they said it's in your head, in March 2013, I believe. Since that day in the doctor's office, I've always been like, I gotta fix this. Like, I gotta fix this. My wires are crossed. Maybe something's unplugged. Like, I was always trying to find the right formula, whether it was medication, whether it was the, therapy, whether it was just my lifestyle, diet. I'm a solutionist by nature. Like, my wife probably hates that about me, in the sense of she'll talk about like a problem at work or a problem with family. And I'm like, well, here's how you fix it. And she's like, I don't want you to fix it. I don't want to fix it. I just want to be able to
listen to me.
Yeah, just listen. And it's like, oh my God, it's like, I gotta be a better listener. But that's just me. Like, as a coach, there's always a way to win, always a way to win. Yeah. So it's like, that's my mindset, is there's always a way to fix something. So that was hardcore, like my thoughts, my motivation. I still get those feelings in waves even to this day, but I wouldn't have wrote this book, if I still felt like there was a clear finish line. I've come to accept that I don't know if there is a finish line to this race that I'm in. So that this book was my way of like almost coming to terms with that reality. So I'm living with it. I'm accepting that it's going to be with me forever. I don't think I'll ever be back to who I was. That was a big thing I was chasing too, Matt, is I want to get back to who I was before, February 12th, 2013, the risk, not risk free, but like I was fearless. You know what I mean? Like, act now, think later. Right. And in a lot of ways, that's probably not good. Right. But I was, what was I at the time? 23, 22. But like, I was a lot more reckless and a lot more just, I'm going to live life freely. And I'm like, I miss feeling that way. I miss being so spontaneous, but now I'm just so like, I'm going to assess every situation, every circumstance, every variable, every person involved. And then I'm going to map out the experience. So that way I have full control of the itinerary or how it's supposed to play out. Gosh, I don't love that my mind is that way, but at the same time, like, hopefully I've developed in other ways, in a way where I feel like maybe it's good I'm where I'm at. Maybe it's good I don't go back to who I was before all this started to change on me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate, the reason I asked was from our first conversation, right? Yeah. I might not have, I would have known to ask that question, but this is what I'm going to end up going over in the episode that's going to follow this, which is like my kind of like, little quick anxiety episode.
Yeah.
There are 7 distinct patterns And
Okay.
all of these thought patterns fall into some of these categories or one, right? And one of them is fix, right? So just real quick, fight, flight, freeze. Everybody's heard of those,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You talked about the flight pattern, right? How do I get out of here? What's the escape hatch? Irish goodbye, right? Those are flight patterns. Somebody else might be a fighter. And they go, well, it's her fault, or it's their fault, or any of that, right? And that's not where you go. You go, how can I get out of here? So you've got a pretty heavy flight preference. But underneath that, what I can tell is before the flight ever occurred, you were a fixer. You got to a point where the fixing stopped working. And so then our nervous system starts ping-ponging around these different responses. And again, I'll go over them in more detail at a future date. But it's very much like you were a fixer. And then that didn't work, so you started becoming a flighter. And then in the times that doesn't work, you're going to the freeze response, which is how long I'm stuck. How long am I going to be here? How much longer can I stay? Right? So there's some patterns to what you're going through, and knowing those patterns, Ryan, determines how we address it. Because if we try to address a flighter like they're a fighter, it's not going to work. If you talk to me about these freeze experiences, right? Where you starts to go in the depressive direction, right? We need to address those differently than we address the moments where you're in flight. Does this make relative sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So that's part of the system is, okay, we figure that out, right? Where are we? How often are we there? Each of those thought patterns also have emotional correlates, right? So and I'll kind of fill in the gaps and then you can flesh the rest of it out. But, you were talking about how is this affecting other people, right? One of the key emotions here is guilt, right? I feel bad that other people are experiencing this, right? Yeah. And again, everybody's different. Very often we're going to see guilt with flight. That comes together a lot versus we're going to see a lot of anger with fight. And I'm not saying you haven't gotten angry, but if that's not you're not blaming your kid that, you're reading the book and you get anxious, right? That may sound backwards to you, but for somebody else, that's where they go immediately, right? You go, I got to get out of here. Oh my God, I can't believe this is affecting him. And somebody else would go, whatever your kid's name is, Tommy, this is all your fault. How dare you? Right. And that's more a fight, anger pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think I do have that with myself. I get so pissed off at myself all the time. Yeah. Even today for some things that have happened. It's just I get so frustrated. It's like, what are you doing? I do a lot of self-talk. I do. Sometimes mostly, out loud, verbally, vocally. But yeah, I get so angry, but it's with myself because it's I know I'm better than this, or I know people around me deserve a better version of me. So yeah, I definitely had that fight fix, but it's definitely me versus me. And I've always felt that way about my life, whether it's sports or my career. I don't like to compare myself. Sure, we've all done it, but it's me versus me. If I can overcome myself and overcome my expectations, then I know I can reach my potential. And I think that will be great enough for anybody, right? But it's always been about my dad taught me that it's never about anybody else. It's you versus you. It's you versus the man in the mirror, right? And so I do believe that. So that man in the mirror though angers me a lot, and I look at him, I look at myself and I'm just what's your deal? You know what I mean? So, and I don't even know what to say about, in response to that. It's I don't know what my deal is. And I would love to know, you know what I mean? Yeah.
The nuance here, which again, I think is important for a lot of guys probably listening. Yeah. The fight reaction is a blame reaction. The fix reaction often comes with shame, right? Where I'm blaming myself. Right. And I'm beating myself up. Yep. And those things are different, but really important because there are people out there that are caught in the blame reaction that aren't even willing to go, yeah, something's wrong and I need to fix it. And 100%. So those are very different patterns. And again, not saying you're not experiencing anger. That makes perfect sense. What other emotions are you very clear on when it comes to your anxiety or your depression? What do you experience emotionally?
Yeah, a lot of sadness, I think. A lot of frustration, a lot of bitterness, but again, it's mainly at myself, sometimes at people that I feel just don't understand, or people who I feel should understand me better because they know my story. But, it's I don't want to be treated different necessarily, but it's hopefully, if I'm talking to it is my point of view. So it could be very, disruptive, but if I'm talking to somebody that has my situation, right, mental health, and they're very outspoken about it, I'm not going to treat them different. I'm going to have a lot more empathy and compassion, and maybe alter my approach and try to show like, okay, I care about you and your well-being. And I think that's important. The way I manage people in my career is I lead with my heart completely. And maybe that's the wrong thing to do, but I care about the person more than the professional. If the people can be good mentally and spiritually and emotionally, on a personal level, then I know I can get the best out of them on a professional level. Right. But so my job is to really take care of that fragile, mental, emotional and spiritual, state that they need to protect. And so, that's a big thing for me is like, I struggle sometimes when I'm like, what I'm going through, but you don't give a shit. But they don't have to. They don't have to give a shit. But it would make me feel a little bit better about myself if I knew they did. So it's like, that's a tough one for me. It's just kind of just having this frustration. But again, that's seldom. It is very seldom. Mainly probably with family, who you would think is the people who would understand this the most, but often kind of just overlook it as just, it's whatever, right? It's just Ryan just going through some shit. But it's like, I wish it was just some shit, but it's not. This is a big one. So those are sadness, bitterness, frustration, some hopelessness sometimes. It's defeating for sure. But I tell you, Matt, I tried so many ways. To, when I feel deflated, I find so many ways to try to inflate myself as much as possible, whether it's going for like that walk or like, let's go out and, do some spontaneous fun things, let's go swimming. Like I try to wake myself up from this figurative, like sadness and sulking that I do. So, I will myself to do things even when I don't want to do it. I will myself because I know if I can do those things, it will help bring me out of these emotional feelings I'm going through and hopefully reset those feelings and bring me the happiness and joy in a distraction.
I think, and there's more there too, Ryan, because obviously, like, we didn't name it, but fear, right? Like, who doesn't feel scared when they're anxious, right? is part of the whole thing. And then, part of what you're sharing also is some loneliness, right? Some feelings of disconnection, right? Those people that you want more empathy from, family, right? I want you to be here with me. I want to be connected, but you feel that disconnection, right?
Yeah, totally.
I think, again, this is the place where, often the work that I do is a little different. Like, each of these emotions makes sense. And as you learn more about the emotion, and most people don't teach us, like, I can give you a quick little definition for each of these emotions and how they work and how we work with them. But a lot of the time you go to standard therapy and you're not going to necessarily like feel your feelings. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But like, hang on, right? Anger needs to be addressed differently than sadness, needs to be addressed differently than guilt, needs to be addressed differently than loneliness. And, again, like, I would never want somebody to get, okay, well, I got to make a spreadsheet and no, hang on, right? What we do is we look on a daily basis. Okay, what are the emotions that we're encountering the most often? Like, let's work on those patterns, right? And what you're going to start to see is that under the surface, these different feelings and these different thoughts and these different physical sensations are actually connected. And there are going to be different patterns. When you're having this emotion, some of these things trigger, right? When you're having some of these, this emotion, I feel it physically this way, or I'm thinking these specific thoughts. So understanding those patterns, they're different for everybody, can be a real game changer, because most of the time, we can't see those threads necessarily on our own. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I'm a guy, but like what I found over the years is that a lot of the conversation isn't had about the emotions and the role each of those emotions play. And, it's the same sort of, again, I'll try to make a sports metaphor, but like, you have these probably specific reactions. What's the word? What's the word I'm searching for? But like, you go to a doctor's office, a reflex. You have specific reflexes, right? That respond particular ways when you're playing, right? And the more you can be aware of those reflexes, the more you can master them instead of them causing you to, react in specific ways that ends up diminishing your game. Is that a fair metaphor?
That is very fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So last category, and I'm super aware of time, unfortunately. The last category is behaviors, right? And these are the things that we do. You already shared some of them, right? So one of them is like trying to get out of here. That's one. Are there other behaviors, not that you're using to cope necessarily, but other behaviors that you see yourself going to when you're, when you're anxious?
Yeah, I think an easy, low hanging fruit would be, probably overeating when I probably shouldn't be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just having like that, the munchies, just like, okay, I'm just going to eat my favorite meal and I'll be fine. And I'm going to overeat it, or I'm going to, eat that midnight snack, that I probably shouldn't have, because it sounds delicious in that moment, so eating habits clearly are something that, have a big impact totally on your health, including mental. And I've learned a lot about that over the last couple of years specifically. Other behaviors, I find myself becoming kind of withdrawn, quiet, and isolate myself, and try to be somewhere where I know I can have, peace and quiet and kind of be in my own thoughts. But that's not always the best idea, because you don't want to be alone with that, your own thoughts, and alone with that man in the mirror, like I mentioned earlier. So those are a couple for sure. And then, one of and other habits I've tried to develop is more exercise. I feel like, my one part of my brain says be a vegetable and chill on the couch or lay in your bed, and there's been many days when I was early on in parenthood where getting out of bed, was a huge achievement, right? During early COVID, I felt like my anxiety it was set back decades in terms of just the progress I had made before COVID, just because I liked being busy. Busy is how I coped with my anxiety and depression. And when the world shut down during COVID, I had nothing to do, nowhere to coach. My job, they had us work remote. I loved eating out, for dinner with my family. And I love hanging out at Target with my kids. Cause, it's like all these things that we did were like kind of taken away overnight. So it's like, getting out of bed was a tough one. So, but for me, it's like, I got to find ways to get off my behind and be more active, because I do feel like that helps me, trigger, positive behaviors and stuff like that.
For sure. Yeah. So, some of the things you're noticing, right? That flight mechanism, but also that like avoidance cave, hideaway mechanism. I always tell people like, eventually we get into these 6 patterns, but at the very beginning, what I try to help with is making it super simple. There's really only 3 behaviors. There's control, there's people pleasing, and there's avoidance. And all of the anxiety behaviors fall into one of those 3 or multiple, right? Sometimes categories. And, it's sounding like, they're, again, once upon a time, I think there was more control there. And now, as that stopped, as that didn't work, you weren't able to control it, right? Your nervous system has started to default more to some of the avoidance behaviors over time. And that's kind of where things have accumulated over the years. Is that a fair conclusion?
Very fair. Very fair.
Yeah. And so, what I look at, right? And this is, we gotta wind down in a second here. I can't rush through this stuff. And this is where it starts. Like any good coaching around this starts with, what's the picture here? Because if I just come in and I tell you, hey, this is what we're doing, right? That's not going to be helpful. So, we have to sort of assess these different categories of symptoms. And then from there, right, there's other conversation that goes into, okay, so you really have to pull off the layers as you go, because if you started here, but then there's this and now there's this, we can't just drill with an auger through the metal backyard, right? We have to go layer by layer, and it's much more like an onion. Yeah. And so like, the first order of business is, for you, in my opinion, would be really addressing the avoidance stuff that's taken, real precedent, right? It's the best you figured out, but it's, obviously not working to the level that you want it to work, right? And then beneath that, some of these other patterns that existed earlier in the experience. Like ultimately, what I'm trying to, illustrate is you figured out the best coping you could here to deal with these patterns, this is the origin of the anxiety down here, right? It's some of these more control fix stuff. But in order to get there, you have to start with the more flight avoidant guilt stuff. And then as you begin peeling back those layers, you're going to be able to get in deeper into some of the control layers. Does that make sense, at least intellectually?
Yeah, I think when you said avoidance, that really resonates, because I do feel like in order to stay in my comfort zone, in order to stay in this really bubbly and comfortable, cushy sandbox, I've avoided a lot of things, right? I stick to what I know. I stick to what I know gives me peace and calm and tranquility and just overall relief. But the problem is I've avoided people. I've avoided situations, opportunities professionally, potential vacations and experiences with my family. I've avoided those because they may take me outside of that box where I'm now in this unknown space, this unknown, matter, right? So it's like, I just want to fucking break down those walls and never return to the safe box, because that's who I was before this all happened. I still think I can get back to that person, but I can be that person evolved, though. I can be a more mature version of this 100%. Reckless 23-year-old now that I have a lot more things going for me in my life than I did back then. Barely knew my wife to be and didn't have any kids and was still in college, and my job was easy. So it's like now things are different. So like I have to, understand that, but I would love to address avoidance, because I think that's what it is. Like that summarizes me, I think, right now in my life, is I avoid things that could bring opportunities of joy and happiness because of the risk of what if they don't? Like, what if they don't bring that? And 100%. Am I going to survive? Is that going to destroy me? Am I going to regret and say, I told you so, we shouldn't have done this, or shouldn't have gone there, or shouldn't have seen this person? Like, I don't want to go down that path of like, how dare someone get me outside my bubble? But ultimately, that's what I need. I need to kind of be, I need to dare to be great again, honestly.
You want the adventure back, right?
You miss the adventure. I do. Yeah. I miss that. I feel like I'm missing out on some stuff. Yeah.
But it makes sense because, again, like I'm always under the operating under the principle that we're doing the best that we know how, right? And if the best way you have figured out how to manage that anxiety is the avoidance, well, you have to keep doing it, because what's the alternative, right? You tried controlling it, you tried fixing it, it didn't work. Right? So now the best you can do is avoid, and it works 30% of the time, 40% of the time, whatever, but it works better than anything else you figured out. So you keep doing it, but it becomes its own painful pattern. So again, that's how we begin working through these levels, but we don't just like, okay, great, I'm avoiding. Yeah, but you already knew that. Like, that's not right. Now, the next step is, okay, now that we've identified these patterns, right? We begin working with them emotionally, biologically. Right. And again, and I can explain that more. And, maybe we have up to you, no pressure. Maybe there's another conversation where we can get more into the tangibles. Yeah. Great. Because I think, again, Ryan, this is like, you are like, this is, whatever, 70, 80% of my clients, like, this is the stuff, man. This is the pattern. Like, this is how it works. And you've spent so many years, again, like just trying to navigate it, but the issue has developed, you've managed it, but it's developed further. And, your body, it feels like it's fighting against you, but we can call them defense mechanisms. We can call them coping skills. I often call them patterns, right? The invisible patterns that are running our lives. If we take the approach that they're trying to help us, that's a lot easier to unwind then we take the approach that they don't make sense, or there's no reason they're here, or any of the above, right? Does that make relative sense?
It does make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, sounds like, we'll talk and we'll kick this down the road and we'll keep going. But, the patterns that you're sharing, and again, I appreciate you sharing these patterns. They're going to be people that absolutely identify with this specific set of patterns, right? Oh yeah, I feel really guilty. Oh yeah, I know how to get out of the room. Oh yeah, I've been avoiding these things, and I've avoided a promotion, or I've avoided certain places with my kids, or any of these things. And other people are going to say, mine doesn't look like that. And I just want to validate anybody who's listening. Like, I get it. Yeah. Because actually there are 7 very distinct patterns that you might see. One of them is people just pass out. And we call that the flop reaction.
Ooh, I don't want that.
No, you don't.
I will fight that one for sure.
Yeah. But, here, the comfort I would want to give you, Ryan, at this point is like, nothing you've said doesn't make sense. Nothing you've said is out of the box or unusual for this type of stuff. And everything you've shared so far is eminently fixable, but it's not fixable from talking about it. and that's the wall that you've hit, is that you've exhausted your ability to address it cognitively. And so you really need other tools and again, it's not just breathing exercises. I promise there are other both things that can be done with professionals, but also things that you can do on your own that are more targeted at the emotional aspects and the physical aspects of what's going on rather than just the cognitive aspects. And the last thing I want to say about this, if I can, is, you talked about like having trouble falling asleep at night and your brain going, that's a symptom. It's not the cause. The thoughts, right? Think of it like leaves on the tree. Right? Their leaves are sprouting off the branches. The branches are the emotional and physiological patterns. And we try to address it by picking off the leaves or gluing leaves back on. But there are hundreds of leaves. There are thousands of leaves. Yeah. And that never works. Does that make sense based on your experience?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Too good of sense. Yeah.
I'm sorry you've been struggling. I totally get it. I've been there. I know what this feels like. But, hopefully some of the things that I can continue saying will be helpful for you and the other people. We're going to have to cut this. I hope this was helpful. I would look forward to a future conversation and we can dive into maybe some of these specific patterns if you're interested.
Yeah, I would love it. I clearly have a lot to learn and understand about what I'm going through. And you seem like somebody who's a fantastic messenger and communicator of articulating these thoughts and these new ideas that it resonates with me, what you're saying. It makes sense. In the past, it didn't make sense, but it makes sense the way you're explaining it. So if you need a lab rat guinea pig, I'm more than happy to be that guy for you and document, try what you recommend, document it, journal it and share, because again, if it works for me, it can work for somebody else. Right. And, again, I'm open to anything at this point in my life because, I feel like I'm at a turning point and this book was kind of what put me at this fork in the road. Like, am I going to do something about it, or am I just going to just deal with it and live with it and cope with it and let this kind of, take over my life? But I wanted to get control of it. And so part 1 was putting my story out there, owning my shit, owning my mask. But part 2 is like, okay, well, it's out there. How am I bettering myself? Right. Like the journey doesn't end just because I have a book out. Like, that's just me saying, hey, there's a story that people can relate to, but I still am working on myself. Like, I could add more pages to this book even since I've released it because of all the things I've been going through or experienced. But it's like, okay, my journey, my recovery, my way of taking care of myself, that to me is something I need to take very serious. And I haven't really come across somebody until now that, seems as invested in it. So I'm always down to have these conversations and hear what you have to say because I'm open to anything. I really am.
Cool, dude. Well, I appreciate it. Again, I think a lot of people out there, a lot of my audience is going to be like, yeah, I am that guy, right? Like, they're going to really identify with you. So my kids are coming home. We got to wrap this up. So I'm going to move us into the outro here. But thanks so much for your vulnerability, dude. I really appreciate it. It's a big deal.
Absolutely.
So if this episode resonated with you, this is exactly why we're building this. The work you're doing matters. And it's not meant to be done alone. So make sure you're subscribed, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening, and share this with a leader in your life who's ready for something deeper. You can also follow along on Instagram between episodes for more tools, reflections, and real conversations. And please let us know what you want to explore next so we can help you on your journey. This is bigger than a podcast. It's a movement. It's a community of authentic leaders choosing to grow, to heal, and step into who they were meant to be so that we can make the impact the world actually needs. Thanks for being here. And as always, let's keep evolving on purpose together.